My name is Amanda Babe Garcia, and I'm the head of museum experiences at the Fred Jones Jr. Museum of Art at the University of Oklahoma. I hope you enjoyed the quick peek we just played for you of the traveling exhibition, Unnatural Selections, Wildlife and Contemporary Art, organized by the National Museum of Wildlife Art and currently on display at the Fred Jones Jr. Museum of Art. We're very excited that you have joined us this afternoon to listen in on what I'm sure will prove to be a fascinating conversation between curator and artist as they talk together about inspiration, evolution, and creative responsibility. To kick things off, exhibition curator Dr. Tammi Hanawalt will begin with a brief introduction to her development of the exhibition. Exhibiting artist Paul Villinski will then share an overview of his work that bridges both science and art, followed by a conversation between Tammi and Paul together. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce you to our two guests for today, Tammi Hanawalt and Paul Villinski. Paul Villinski is an American sculptor widely known for transforming littered cans from the city streets into large-scale abstract installations of lifelike butterflies. Over 3 decades, his wide-ranging work has engaged themes as diverse as memory, childhood, addiction and recovery, flight, nature, sustainability, and transformation. With a lifelong concern for environmental issues, his work frequently repurposes and recycles discarded materials. An avid pilot and sailor, metaphors of flight and soaring often appear in his work. A graduate of the Cooper Union, Villinski's work has been exhibited and collected throughout the United States. In November of this year, he will be one of several Americans to participate in the 15th Havana Biennale in Cuba. He lives and works in Queens and the Catskills with his partner and painter, Amy Park, and their young son, Lark. Paul, welcome to the program today. We also have with us this afternoon Dr. Tammi Hanawalt. Dr. Hanawalt is the curator of art at the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson, Wyoming. She attended Arizona State University in Tempe, Arizona, where she received a BFA in theater design and later her master's degree in art history from OU. Hanawalt has worked in professional and academic theater in Arizona and California and was a staff costume designer at ASU. She has taught numerous classes in both costume design and art history at ASU, OU, and the Institute of American Indian Art. Dr. Hanawalt has contributed to numerous publications, as well as curating several exhibitions, including serving as the consulting curator for the New World's Women to Watch 2024 exhibit at the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Tammi. We are thrilled to have you with us today. And now, without any further ado, I will hand the reins over to you.
Thank you, Amanda. Welcome, everyone. I am going to start by first giving you a little bit of an introduction to the National Museum of Wildlife Art, which lies between the town of Jackson and the entrance to Grand Teton National Park. The south entrance of Yellowstone is just 20 miles north of that entrance to Grand Teton. In the summer, the town of Jackson swells to probably at least 2 million with tourists seeking to experience the Wyoming wilderness and see, hopefully from a distance, its plentiful and diverse wildlife. When you are in the museum, either on the sculpture trail or its surrounding patio, you might be greeted by a curious chipmunk or a boulder ground squirrel, or perhaps in the parking lot, you might be confronted by a fox or a badger, and we've even had a little bear join us on our patio. NMWA sits on the homeland of the Eastern Shoshone and Shoshone-Bannock people, and we know that many other tribes lived here seasonally and hunted the abundant wildlife in what is now known as Jackson Hole. In 1912, the land that sits directly across the highway from the museum was designated as the National Elk Refuge, and in the winter, more than 8,000 elk migrate to this spot. Immersed in nature, this is the perfect setting for a museum that focuses on wildlife art and whose inception came about thanks to Bill and Jaffa Kerr, who both, I might add, went to OU, and yes, they were Sooners fans. Now that you have an idea about the setting, let me briefly tell you about the wildlife art exhibit in this exhibit. What is wildlife art? Well, in its broadest sense, it is artwork that includes animals. Although animals are the subject matter, many of our very first some of our very first artworks depicted animals. Artists depicting animals in the 19th and 20th centuries were not considered serious artists. Animals were specimens in scientific studies. However, in the late 19th centuries, artists were influenced by Darwin, who represented animals in their natural habitats. This helped to carve out a space for wildlife art. This art was devoid of any human influence. Since perhaps about 1900, wildlife art was grouped together with the art of the American West. Animals were more simply a part of the vast landscape that artists portrayed as beautiful and deadly. Those living in the East brought into the idea of the West through the art that showed the possibilities of a vast, bountiful, and pristine West. But this romantic version of the American West is much different than the realities of today. In 2024, we're living in an epoch known as the Anthropocene. This is defined by human influence in the environment. In this era, we humans must come to terms with our survival and how to maintain our evolving relationship with the natural world. When I began the development of unnatural selections, I soon realized that contemporary artists were addressing perhaps more human concerns, which in return related to the wildlife. There are many cases that I came across in the development of this exhibition and my continuing work that shows we manage wildlife rather than coexist. I think of how humans have allowed the condors to live, and even the founding of the elk refuge shows that we need to assist wildlife in their survival. Nevertheless, and perhaps most importantly, the artists in this exhibition show us that humans have always had deep bonds with wildlife, and the art showed here demonstrates how the artists exhibit those bonds. Unnatural selections is, of course, a play on Darwin's theory of natural selection, the process by which the species adapts to the environment. With this in mind, I look to group the artworks into sections under headings that seem to fit the issues. Yet it's not to say that there's not an overlap in what is addressed, but the sections are as follows. Amanda, can you turn the first section is politics. Can you turn it again? Which means colonization, oppression, and activism. As in the last three, Stood Proud and Tall by Gillian Mark, which shows three northern white rhino. Now there are only two. Fatu, I believe was the male's name, died, I think, even before the sculpture was cast. These three are precariously balanced, as is their existence. Amanda, can you go to the next one? Julie Buffalo Head uses a variety of wildlife in her artwork to critique pressing issues ranging from native rights and world politics to feminisms. In Six Pack Colonialism, she presents a satirical story that refers to the aftermath of colonization. This, the artist states, represents an inversion of power. Quote, my animal figures can be stand-ins for people, philosophies, or signify various kinds of relationships. Next, please. Or these colorful penguins by William Sweetlove, who carry their own water bottles on their back because they have no viable clean water supply. These, there's 6 of them altogether. These are only 3 of them, but they are made of recycled PET bottles. Next, please. Penelope Gottlieb places invasive plants over Audubon prints to show the ravages of humans on the environment. Next, please. The next section is science, animals surviving in the Anthropocene. Artist James Prozac looks at the way humans categorize plants and animals into nomenclatures by numbering silhouettes that have no didactic key. Next, please. Ruth Marshall knitted an exact replica of a splayed tiger cub that was a specimen in the American Museum of Natural History. She was shocked to see that the Museum of Natural History had so many pelts of wild cats. Next, please. The next section is aesthetics, wildlife as art and entertainment. Troy Abbott makes a video of a red canary that runs on a continuous loop connected to a circuit board at the base of a vintage cage. The piece represents the artist's concerns with the depletion of the natural world. Next, please. Made of Rebar, This Western Fox by Wendy Kempler is her way of experimenting with form and the progression of movement. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I went too quickly. This piece by Star Hardridge, Muskogee Creek, a cycle of abundance, which represents the bison in the center. If you can see that bison head in the center, and it speaks to pottery designs from his own heritage. Next, please. I think that should be Wendy Kempler. Thank you. Made of Rebar, This Western Red Fox by Wendy Kempler is her way of experimenting with form and the progression of movement. Her use of negative and positive space in such a way shows how animals can seemingly disappear and reappear in nature. The rebar she uses also recalls industrial refuse. Next, please. Watson by Annie Schofield and Luis Garcia Neri, known as the collabs, give emotions to animals that they place in urban settings, lending to us to question the future of human survival in these same environments. Next, please. In the final section, tradition, which can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people, but here it is defined as the transmission of cultural stories and histories across generations. Next, please. I think I'm in the wrong spot, but there we go. Sorry about that. Well-known glass artist Preston Singletary refers to Tlingit stories through the design he imbues into his own glass creations. White Raven is a reference to the Tlingit story of Raven in the Box of Daylight. It's also a reference to Singletary's exhibition of the same name, which I think was in Oklahoma City just recently. Next, please. Cathedral by the well-known artist Kiki Smith features a wolf and animal used in the animal used in other works by the artist and influenced by Japanese printmaking techniques. Also, African and Native American and Celtic mythologies, a series of French tapestries about the apocalypse, along with her own personal histories. Next, please. Lauren Strohacker and Kendra Sollers initially created their site-specific animal land as a way to impart knowledge about species whose habitats were once in urban areas. This version was commissioned by NMWA with a reference to our wildlife, including the elk seen here from the elk refuge. There's also a grizzly bear and wolves that Kendra filmed at the Grizzly Bear and Wolf Rescue Center in West Yellowstone. Next, please. In Caravan, Peter Jarakaris conveys a mythical aura where where the owl is in a human-animal transformation that might also be described as a dreamscape. The artist offers us to consider the fragmented relationship with nature. And the final slide is Pegasus, which was created by our featured artist today, Paul Villinski. I know he's going to talk about this further in our conversation, but Paul, I am going to turn over the speaking reins to you.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much. There we are. Okay. Tammi, thank you. And it's wonderful to be here with you all today. I am basically going to race through several decades of work and try to point at some of the ideas behind some of the things I've done. And So this will be very rapid fire. In fact, we can move to the next slide, please. There we go. So that piece, Pegasus, is an image both of a horse, but with a flock of white butterflies alighting on that horse sculpture. And those butterflies are kind of the thing that I have, I guess, been best known for in the last couple of decades. And they are made from aluminum cans collected by homeless canners from the streets of New York City. And next slide, please. There we are. And that's what those butterflies begin their life as. So it is a process of transforming this detritus from the streets into these delicate aluminum butterflies. Next slide. And there are about 50 different species of butterflies and moths represented. They're very accurately shaped contours based on actual species. And in these works, they often take these kind of geometric shapes, and sometimes there are kind of narrative elements involved as well. Next. Sometimes the butterflies kind of look as though they are performing some sort of ritual dance of their own, and there's a kind of linear aspect that is created. And I should add that these are all individually installed one at a time into the walls that serve as the canvases for these works. Next, please. So that those kind of linear configurations led to the realization that I could actually create cursive script with the butterflies, so they could literally start to spell out words and create text pieces. Next. And then before too long, these flocks of butterflies began to alight on objects in my studio. And so this is a cello that is leaning against the wall, and the butterflies obviously originate from within the cello, inside the cello, and spill out onto the wall. And in a piece like this, I'm kind of trying to make some sort of visual counterpart to an idea of melody and rhythm. Next. Those butterflies began to alight on antique Italianate frames that I was discovering, and that led to a large and ongoing series of pieces like this, where the frame actually becomes the artwork. Next. And what winds up sort of paying our bills are these residential installations of flocks of butterflies that happen by commission, and then not just residential, but also in places of business and public spaces as well. Next. And next. Obviously some fairly tasteful homes that we're looking at here. But next, I do get a kick when I'm in those sort of very posh settings, thinking about the origin of this artwork, and this is where it originates. And in this New York City storm sewer, there are at least 6 butterflies waiting to be born. Next. This is a piece that was very gratifying for me to do. It's in the main lobby space of the Mott Children's and Women's Hospital in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And it was fun because I collected all this aluminum not from the streets of New York, but from beverage cans that the construction workers who were building the building were consuming. Next. And each of these butterflies has a little brass counterweight, so they're actually kinetic, and the butterflies move gently with airflow throughout the space, which gives it a kind of engaging quality. and as I said, this was a work in healthcare settings like this is very gratifying to me because like many artists, I feel that I really want to try to be of service. The idea that an artwork like this might sort of present a moment's diversion to a sick child or their worried parents while they're waiting to see their doctors is quite meaningful to me. Next, please. So from the butterflies, while those butterflies have been ongoing work for me for over 2 decades, I'm also engaged in other kinds of projects. The mechanics of it are that the work with the butterflies kind of produce the income that allows me to do other things like this. This was a piece that was done for the Prospect One Biennial in New Orleans in 2008. Next, please. This piece was basically about transforming a FEMA trailer like the 150,000 trailers that were deployed to the Gulf Coast after Hurricane Katrina into a mobile artist's live-in workspace. And it had to be off-grid. It had to make its own power. So this structure has a large solar system as well as a micro wind turbine. And the idea here, next please, was that this would be basically a studio space that would allow either artists who were displaced from their homes and studios in a disaster setting to continue to stay on site and to respond creatively to what was going on around them, or to allow visiting artists to kind of come down and embed themselves in a situation and try to contribute creatively. And kind of the impetus for this was the tradition of artists embedding themselves with the armed services, the war artists whose contribution to the war efforts was actually to try to record and respond to what was going on around them. So this piece was exhibited in New Orleans and then traveled to various other places around the country. Next, please. While I was in New Orleans, after Hurricane Katrina, I did visit there because I work with a gallery in New Orleans. I spent a week or so in the lower Ninth Ward, which was one of the areas hardest hit by Hurricane Katrina, and I was kind of collecting detritus, that remained after the hurricane, and I found this stack of LP records on, in the mud of what had been someone's home, and transformed them into this flock of butterflies. I mean, this is just a detail of a larger piece. Next, please. And when I got home, I looked at my own record collection. I had been an avid, pop music fan and record collector, and my records started to get very nervous because they knew what was coming. And so I did actually, after some time, make the decision to start cutting up my own record collection. Next, please. So the result were these flocks of LP birds. I call them long-playing birds. And I guess the notion that was driving this for me was that I was trying to try to convey an idea that the work of these musical artists who I had loved and which had influenced me so much was sort of moving out into the world and spreading its influence on the wind, if you would. Next. And some of these pieces have, taken up residence in hotel lobbies and places like that. Next. So one of the more interesting rabbit holes that I went down in the studio involved breeding butterflies. And I was fortunate to be introduced to Rudy Mattoni, who at the time was an octogenarian lepidopterist, one of the leading butterfly geneticists in the world. And he and I became fast friends. Next. And he convinced me that it would be fun to, go out and catch a few butterflies and try to breed them in the studio. Well, this led into a 2.5-year project where I basically created a hydroponically sustained butterfly breeding laboratory, and in fact rented a second space in order to do this. Next. And it proved to be very challenging because basically, each species of butterfly has a particular host plant. And in order to create these and sustain these ongoing colonies or populations of butterflies in the studio, we had to grow those host plants through New York City winters. Next. So there were flight cages, which were basically environments for the butterflies to go through their complete life stages. Next. And it was a deeply fascinating project because I went from using the butterfly metaphorically and symbolically to actually really digging into the life cycles and the actual biology of Lepidoptera. And that led to doing things like going to Peru for 10 days to take part in a neotropical Lepidoptera field course. Next, please. And ultimately, I moved that butterfly breeding laboratory into a room in my gallery in New York City as part of an exhibition. And during the 6 weeks of that exhibition, we continued to breed butterflies. And I called this the butterfly machine because it was really sort of, in my mind, it had become a sort of dystopian vision of what, of an environment that would allow butterflies to continue to exist during this, this mass species extinction event that we're currently experiencing. So this was sort of about that. Next, please. But what kind of had inspired this whole thing in the first place was this idea of a sculptural idea that I had of a human figure that would be inhabited by butterflies. And what I was trying to get at was to really suggest that there isn't any separation between all of the species in kingdom Animalia. That these separations are really artificial, and that as human beings, we have sort of cleaved ourselves from the rest of the animal kingdom. Like, we have forgotten that we are large mammals like any other large mammal. So at that time, I was really trying to come up with some image to suggest that that we are all one. Next, please. So this was this wire figure sculpture with enclosed with some fine nylon mesh. And in the morning, we would take some of the butterflies from the breeding laboratory and place them in this figure, and they would spend part of the day in the figure before sort of exiting the figure through its head. Next. And next, please. I will say just that I now understand why artists generally don't work with living creatures, because that was a very it was a very challenging couple of years. So this is another sort of topic that I am addressing in my work, and in fact, it's the origin of these aluminum butterflies. Is that some 32 years ago, I went into recovery for alcoholism and drug addiction. In the first year or two of that experience, I wanted to start to make artwork about this process of transforming that I was seeing all around me in this community, recovery community, people whose lives were just complete disasters and train wrecks, who through the process of recovery were transforming back into very beautiful and useful and lovely human beings. Next. So I started to basically notice all these crushed beer cans on the streets of the city, and I started to collect them, not knowing quite what to do with them, but they were evocative objects to me, and they kind of suggested alcoholic drinking. They kind of had some of the characteristics of the alcoholics that I was encountering, kind of run over by life and discarded and sort of worthless. And after about 6 months of looking at and playing around with these cans, I finally cut one into a butterfly shape. And I thought, oh, that's it, because that's what I'm trying to get at, this transformation, this personal transformation. Next. So in recent years, I am finally at a point where I want to really try to address this topic of addiction and recovery and related sorts of topics like child abuse head on. It's like I'm ready to do that now in my, after 32 years of recovery. And so I've started to have those same canners that I work with who collect the aluminum cans for me. I had them collect empty liquor bottles from the streets of New York. This is a piece called Belt. And so it's this kind of an endless chain of empty liquor bottles woven together with leather belts. Next. This is a detail of a piece called Quilt, also leather belts woven together with this one with liquor bottles and children's books woven into it. And there's no getting around it. My work is deeply autobiographical, and it's not so much that I want to talk about myself, but I have this feeling that as an artist, if we communicate what we know about, other people that know about those things will identify with this work and feel less alone with that. And so this is, quite frankly, about my childhood as the child of an alcoholic who took a great deal of solace in reading. Next. And the piece kind of comes off the wall and devolves and comes unbound the way the family life of an alcoholic often does. Next. But as it rolls off the wall like that, there's a kind of a little tent area created behind it. And that is the home for this little child's chair and a copy of The Wizard of Oz turned to with the image of the tornado. Next. Another thing that has consumed me throughout my life is flying. I'm an Air Force brat. My father was an alcoholic Air Force navigator for 20 years. But I was very deeply interested in learning to fly, and in particular, learning to fly gliders to do soaring. Next. So that's an image of my glider. This is an image from the cockpit of the glider over West Texas some years ago. Next. I always have to throw this next slide in. That is my little boy when he was, I think, 4 or 5 years old. Next. But for decades, I have been making work that employs, wing imagery. And so this is a wall piece. And this wing, as you can see, is comprised of found work gloves collected from the streets of New York. Next. And those gloves were really fascinating to me because they had all been worn by someone. They were like, someone's hand had lived inside that glove. And so these to me were images of bringing all these human hands together, to make something possible, in this case, to suggest that flight was possible. Next. This is a piece also with, glove wings, but this is supporting one of my father's Vietnam flight suits. And, at the time my father was quite sick, and I felt that he could use a pair of wings. Next. This is a more recent piece made with several hundred chef's knives. And this piece to me was really, really about kind of risk and the risk that artists live with, because we're all really attempting to take flight in some way, to take off and soar. But as this piece suggests, if that doesn't go well, it's not going to be pretty. I mean, a crash landing with these wings will be disastrous. And so this is, again, trying to talk about that balance of risk and reward, and that kind of tightrope walk that we do as artists. Next, please. I'll try to just move. I think I've got to move more quickly through this, but there were a series of kind of humorous flying helmets. This one is actually all the propellers on those little airplanes are motorized, so they'll all spin. Next. This is an image, again, with the butterflies and that figure, kind of an Icarus-like image. Next. There are a series of pieces kind of based on the model airplanes, the flying balsa wood model airplanes that I built as a child, that also incorporate butterflies. Next. And this is one of those that where the scale just kind of took off. So this piece is 33 feet across, and it has 1,000 black butterflies winding over this kind of skeletal structure. And to me, this was really about the butterflies kind of lifting the old bones of this aircraft aloft. Next. This piece is timely because this was actually, I lived in New York when 9/11 occurred, and it was definitely the most difficult and strangest day that I've ever lived through. And in the weeks and months that followed were also very anxiety filled for most of us there in the city. And I needed to make some image of peace and restfulness. And this is what I made at that time. So basically a little child's bed. I mean, this piece, I guess, was nearly 20 feet across, but just trying to make an image of rest and of being carried away in dreams. And that was my response to 9/11, of course, the anniversary of which is today. Next. A flying wheelchair. And this piece now lives at the Miami International Airport. And again, just kind of trying to think about, if I lost use of my legs, what would I want? What kind of wheelchair would I personally want? Next. A piece done by commission for an elementary school in New Haven. It's called Dream Desk. And I was able to rescue an old desk and chair from this school and created the sculpture. Next. The wings and tail surfaces are covered, kind of collaged with little pieces of paper. I had each of the 400 children in the school write a sentence or two about their own dreams and aspirations. So that's what the wing surfaces are made up of, their statements. Next. These are flying bicycles. Again, a percent for our commission for the city of New York. This is in a large track and field house, athletic facility on Staten Island. They're called the Sky Cycles. And next, they are very, very realistically engineered and crafted so that they're really fully functional. When you pedal, the propellers spin. When you manipulate the handlebars, the other controls function. Next, please. I moved too quickly there, but the idea with those was to create something that was so realistic that it put the viewer in this position of not knowing if that was an actual thing, an actual aircraft, or an artwork, which I think is an interesting strategy to get people to engage. This is a video. Can we play this? There we go. So this is a piece called Delivery. It actually was just on exhibit at Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park in Grand Rapids. That's what this footage is from. It is 25 feet across. It's based on or 30 feet across. It's based on a World War II Mitchell B-25 bomber. And instead of dropping heavy ordnance, this B-25 drops groceries. So this is really, it's a simple idea. It's really about trying to make an image that asks, what if we turn this situation on its head? I mean, a tiny fraction of our budget for national defense could basically solve food insecurity in this country permanently. And so that's what that piece is about. And again, it's basically a giant model airplane, just like the ones I built when I was 12, except this one weighs 750 pounds. Next, please. Two final slides here, just to kind of point to what I'm doing more recently. These are aluminum flowers, again, made from those same cans collected off the streets of New York. This is a self-portrait figure, and it's called Essence. And for me, it's a little bit kind of it's kind of a piece that in the ongoing story of my own recovery and evolution as a person. I kind of feel that, after 30 years in recovery, life is more beautiful now. Next. And this is also a video, if you could, please. There we go. And so this is this is the most recent thing to come out of my studio. It's made with 1,000 found liquor bottles. These are those little tiny kind of airline style bottles. It's called Breaker. It's a wall piece that takes the form of a wave, and it's mounted up high enough so that as a viewer, you kind of walk underneath it and get the sense that this thing may break over your head. And it has a certain visual delight. It's quite colorful and seductive that way, but it also has a slightly threatening quality. So again, a piece that I hope will be part of a show in the next couple of years that is sort of exclusively about this topic of alcoholism and recovery, which I think is a very germane topic given the tens of millions of people in the United States alone who are experiencing addiction or the addiction of someone that they care about. And so that's basically where I'll end it. I think we go back to the next slide is back to Pegasus. There we are. And I guess now, there you are, Tammi. Hi.
Thanks, Paul. That's amazing. Great work.
Thank you.
And since we're on Pegasus right now, maybe you can talk a little bit about this using found objects like the beer cans and the wood that Pegasus is made of. I'm thrilled to have this in our permanent collection. And I know that the pieces themselves are significant to you personally. And you've already stated that it's about dealing with your own addictions, dealing with the people or, other people looking at this to recognize their own struggles in your artwork. Can you just talk about this piece a little bit and about what it means, the story of Pegasus and all of that?
Yes, absolutely. So that I alluded to this idea that I was working with earlier when I was involved in that butterfly breeding project. And, I was really taken with this notion that that as human beings, particularly as people who live in large urban centers like New York, we forget that we are part of the animal kingdom, and we feel very separate from all the other species. And we've literally forgotten that we are basically, our DNA has only a 2% difference from that of chimpanzees, So I was really involved in I was just thinking a lot about the idea that all of nature is interwoven, all species are interrelated, that there is a complete enmeshment of all life on the planet. And that was an insight that came out of breeding butterflies, because when you try to remove butterflies from the natural habitat and bring them into more of a laboratory setting, you lose all of this rich complexity of the natural world, and things happen. Viruses take over, systems fail because we can't recreate that rich web of interrelated processes that are occurring in the natural world. So I was really trying to find some way to symbolize that it's all interrelated. And so it's a very simplistic image, but I just wanted to bring these two species together, the butterflies and the horse, and make some image of these two species kind of coexisting in a beautiful way. So that was what drove this image. And I had always wanted to make a horse in the studio for some reason. And this one was made, so the butterflies are, again, the aluminum cans from the streets of New York, and the horse was made from a large shipping crate that I had something delivered on. And so it was one crate that I just kept cutting up into smaller pieces and crafting into this horse. And then, of course, the coloration is created with just a torch on the wood.
So do you see a little bit of I'm thinking of the myth of Pegasus, the story of Pegasus, and the horse that can fly, that carries a hero into battle, and then also, I believe, drops a hero off its back when Zeus is mad. But do you see a little bit maybe of your own transformations in your artwork in this piece and that story? Is there a relationship there?
It's a very interesting question, and it's not something I thought about in personal terms. It is called Pegasus because there's this allusion to flight and a flying horse, and this notion that these flocks of butterflies could carry things aloft, right? That kind of imagery that I've been using for a number of years. And, I think that the horse is going to outweigh this small flock of white butterflies, but, but that was sort of part of the thinking.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. It's
Thank
a great
you. I'm really thrilled that it's in your collection. It's the best possible place that Pegasus could have landed.
So you feel that it's a good fit for a wildlife museum, and we'll say it's a wild horse. Here, yeah.
Yeah, I do feel that. And, as I mentioned to you the other day, I really like my work to speak to a very broad audience. Some of my artist friends' work, you have to be completely conversant with art history to have any access to what they're doing, right? You have to already know a great deal in order to appreciate what they're doing. My work, I hope, is not like that. I hope my work is just sort of more, user-friendly, and so that anyone can kind of stumble upon one of my pieces and find some way of enjoying it. And and so I love the idea that the National Museum of Wildlife Art has a very broad audience. You've got hikers coming in out of the mountains, and skiers stopping by, and everyone that visits Jackson, I think, probably winds up there. So
we hope so.
Audience. Yeah. Well, I know it's high on the list there. Yeah.
On that topic of your artwork, you deal with some really, they're pretty dark subjects, and it must take an emotional toll on you when you're in that space of creating a piece or even developing a piece. How do you cope with that, or how do you handle that? Is there a way that you get out of that? Because I know that even in writing about what might be a serious topic or something that's, as heavy as alcoholism, you said child abuse, those kinds of things.
Mhm.
How do you maintain your own distance from that while you're creating a piece? I mean, this must be difficult.
Um, Again, a very good question. I think there's a reason that I've had to, be in this process of recovering for 3 decades before I was ready to say, okay, now I'm in my 60s, and I want to tackle this subject matter head on, and I want to speak about it openly. It's taken a long time to get there, but for me. I'm living this sort of beautiful recovered life with a happy, intact family, and with a satisfying social life and a satisfying career, and that's very, very far from the life I grew up in as a child. And so I'm not, when I kind of look back and try to make work about those early experiences, I'm doing it from this place that I live in now. So it's not actually, I mean, so yes, there's quite a bit of darkness in that work, but I don't have to be in that dark place in order to make that work now. Um, and again, it is really about trying to share human experience. I mean, that's what drives me as an artist. I want to make work that someone else will encounter and go, "Oh, I know what this guy is talking about. I thought I was the only one that felt this way. I'm not alone after all." And when that piece quilt, the blanket with the chair behind it, was shown for the first time, it was shown at the Taubman Museum of Art in Roanoke. And the curator told me that she walked into the gallery one morning, and there was a middle-aged female security guard at the museum who was standing in front of it crying because she had such deep identification with it. And I don't want to make her cry, but the idea that she can communicate, she's relating to this piece and feeling that she is recognized. She recognizes that work and the artist behind it, and she knows that she's being recognized. I mean, it's kind of like when I was a teenager and I would listen to, a particular song that moved me deeply. Father and Son by Cat Stevens.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, someone else knows what this is too. I'm not alone. I'm in this group of people. So that's really what is driving this work about these darker subjects. And again, we have over 20 million people in the United States in active recovery, and we've got probably at least another 20 million who should be,
Yeah.
who we're saving a seat for. So this is a huge number of people whose lives are touched by addiction, either directly or indirectly. And it's fascinating to me that so few visual artists have actually confronted this, because it's also, as we know, there's, from the abstract expressionists on, there's this like sort of crazy tradition or history of, drunken painters. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's a very germane topic, I think. And I want to see if I can make a complete body of work about it.
Great. That's amazing. I think it's probably because we don't face it because it's such a difficult thing to do. So it's great to say that you can look back on it, on the situation, and you don't have to connect it to yourself to do the work.
Yeah.
But
again, it's also that doing it from the perspective of someone in recovery with many years of recovery. I mean, when you're in a 12-step meeting, you'll hear someone tell a story of some just kind of horrifying, night that they spent, falling down drunk and, whatever it is, and everyone in the room will be laughing. And, they're laughing because we're looking through the lens of our present recovery and serenity back at the horror show that were our lives. And there's actually humor in it to us now. So it may be a little bit hard to understand, but that, when you're on the other side of
Right.
this and you have some distance from it, it's much easier to see. And
Yeah.
it doesn't discount the true horror of it, but
Yeah, well, I'm certain that everybody can relate in some way to someone, if not themselves, that have been touched
yeah.
by
Yeah, I
a
mean, it's
substance of
very
any sort.
unusual that
Yeah,
a family doesn't have some family member, a workplace doesn't have some employee or colleague. Everyone knows someone who is struggling with this,
right.
especially in this age of opiate addiction and, the
Yeah,
thanks to the Sacklers. So
yeah. Well, and I mean, we need art. I mean, that's what's great about artists, that they can address these kind of things that are so relatable in ways that I think it can make us feel a little bit more normalized, more
Mhm. Mhm.
just more accepting. So
Yeah,
that is a good way that I think to look at it.
yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, yeah.
Another question I had about you talked about doing the FEMA trailers after the art studio trailer after Hurricane Katrina, and I was thinking, and we had talked about this before, but that we were putting this exhibit together here at the National Museum of Wildlife Art for during the pandemic. The pandemic
Mhm.
pretty much hit right when we were starting to put this show together. How did you, and I asked each of the artists in the show, or we did, about how they were dealing with that. And
Mhm.
so many had such different experiences. How do you feel you handled it? And can you talk a little bit about that and how you feel in the aftermath of, we hope, in the aftermath of COVID? So it's still with
Yeah,
us, right? So,
yeah. Oh yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I've had this persistent cough, which I apologize for, and I've taken 2 COVID tests in the last couple of days, so it's still very much with us.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and I do want to talk about that, but you mentioned that FEMA trailer, and it's funny, like right now as we speak, that hurricane, what is it, Catherine, is approaching New Orleans again. So
yeah,
oh, that I certainly hope they survive that today. It's really getting crazy, and the increasing intensity of these tropical storms because of the warmer water, because of the Anthropocene, and,
mhm,
anthropomorphic climate change, or um, is really troubling to me. But COVID, you know, that was such a weird couple of years for everyone. But I was very fortunate because a year before the pandemic arrived, um, I finally bought a place up in the country. After 38 years in New York City, I bought what I thought was going to be a weekend house up in the mountains in the Catskills. And within a year, my partner said, "I think we should move into the house. I'm tired of New York. Let's move." And so we did. We moved up in September of 2019, and we were just settling into this new routine. The transition from a city of 9 million to a town of 4,000 was remarkable. And then the pandemic arrived, and we were so happy to be in this house in the woods, basically, instead of in Queens, New York, and where people couldn't leave their apartments, and where, what was it, over 700 people a day were dying in the first weeks of the pandemic in New York City. I mean, it was horrifying. So it was very frightening, but at least here we could be outdoors. The deer were visiting us every day. The owls were arriving in the trees. You know, we were talking with our chipmunk friends on the property. For me, it was a tremendous relief because I was reconnecting with the natural world. You know, I was born in Maine. I was kind of you know, a young hippie kid and country kid. And then I found myself in the city for almost 4 decades. And to come back into a rural environment, you know, where I'm surrounded by wildlife and the natural world was really a relief. And so my experience of COVID had a lot to do with that. And then it also had to do with how do I continue as an artist here? And my big COVID project was that I was able to buy an old department store, and I spent a year turning it, you know, doing a gut renovation and turning it into an incredible workspace for my partner and I, which has also become kind of a community center in our little village here, where we're doing lots of art and cultural program, and you know, at a foreign film series throughout the winter, and we do artist talks every month with visiting artists and that sort of thing. So that was all thanks to COVID, I think, you know.
Wow. I would like
Yeah.
to come. You'll have to give me the address.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. We'd love to have you. You can come be a visiting artist for us. Yeah, that'd be great.
It sounds lovely.
Yeah.
Um, oh, great. Amanda, are we running out of time?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, oh my gosh, I really could sit here and listen to you guys talk for decades. I think this is really fascinating, and I hate to jump on. So I apologize for cutting you all short. But I think we are at time. So I do want to go ahead and thank everyone for joining us today, and really to extend a heartfelt thank you to you, Paul and Tammi, for joining us today and taking the time to share your important work with us, and the meaning that you find within it for yourselves. I know everyone here who has seen the work in the exhibition all together as a whole have really found something quite special. So thank you so much. We've really enjoyed hosting this exhibit here in our spaces. If you're
when does it run through again?
Through September 22nd. So if you're in the area, please stop by if you have a chance to see it. And if you can't, we do have sort of a virtual tour option. And I think a link to that will go in the chat here in a moment. And you all will be able to view it from the comfort of your own home if you can't come see it here in our space. And I think that's it. We'll go ahead and just wrap it up from here. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you to both of you for your time. Really appreciate it. And have a great, wonderful, creative rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
It was really
Amanda.
a pleasure.
Paul,
Thank you.
I hope to see you up here sometime too. In Jackson.
I look forward to that. We'll be in touch.
And you, Amanda.
Oh, absolutely. I'll be there.
Great.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.